Hey everybody, I'm Lindsay from Lanes Less Traveled, and I'm so excited to talk to you about road schooling, a lifestyle of learning today. So we are a family of 7 who hit the road from the Northeast Texas area in the fall of 2018. We have 5 children who are currently 19, 16, 13, 11, and 9 years old. We have 3 girls, 2 boys. We have always been homeschoolers, so this is our 14th year of homeschooling. Back in 2018, we decided that we wanted to take our learning on the road. We had done extended family road trips to different historical places and national parks over the years, and we always tried to correlate it with what we were learning in our homeschool. So we learned family style, which means all 5 kids, when all 5 kids were at home, all 5 kids would sit together and I would read aloud to them, be it history or our science or geography or whatever we were learning at the time. We all learned together. That way we were all on the same page. It made learning or teaching easier for me, and it made learning easier for them. And it also made trips wherever we went for vacation or whatever really cool, because every child knew exactly what we were talking about or what we were learning about or where we were visiting. So that was one of my favorite things about homeschooling in the early years when our kids were little and we would take family vacations. So in 2016, 2017, we read a book about John Muir helping to start our nation's national park system. So we were super inspired learning about the start of the national park system between Theodore Roosevelt and John Muir, and then we read a simple John Muir biography, so that kind of got the kids inspired to learn about visit all the places that John Muir had gone and walked and hiked and slept under the stars and all that good stuff. And then we read another book called Richard Halliburton's Book of Marvels, and in that book he talked about the discovery of Yosemite. So we know it wasn't the discovery in the true sense of the word, but it was the first time European settlers had seen Yosemite Valley. And so it was a story of how they hiked in and they were getting a tour by the Native Americans, and they came upon Yosemite Falls, or I'm sorry, Bridalveil Falls, and just the awe and wonder and all the sounds. And after we read that book or that story, we were like, we have to visit Yosemite. It just inspired all of us to want to go and want to see and want to feel the mist of the waterfall on our faces and want to walk the same trails that those first European settlers had walked and see where the native people of that area had lived and look at the animals and all that good stuff. So at that point, we really got an itch to sort of ditch our sticks and bricks life and hit the road, because we knew that there had to be something more than just what we would experience on family vacations or family trip. We knew that there had to be just a different feeling of experiencing a place or visiting a place when we were living on the road, and this was our actual lifestyle. So I call our learning now a lifestyle of learning. So yes, we wake up and we do morning time and we spend our time, our school time, learning in the morning, but really our whole day is a lifestyle of learning. So we really focus on immersing ourselves where we are and learning about the places, reading about the places, and then getting to really experience those places by going out and visiting, looking at the nature, visiting local tide pools, visiting the historic marks, all that good stuff. So it really brings learning alive for our kids, and it helps to solidify what we've read, because then they're touching and feeling and smelling and seeing these things that we've read about in books in person, and it brings it to life. So I'm going to take you through the steps of how I plan what we're going to learn, what we're going to read about, and correlate it with where we're going to visit, or opposite, where we're going to visit, and then I bring in books and different learning elements so we can learn about the places that we're going to visit. All right, let's talk about planning your route and then planning your learning. So look ahead at your route, see where you're going. I utilize places or websites like Road Trippers to bring in different historic points if I'm not already familiar with them, Google searches, Pinterest, things like that, to decide the places we're going to visit and each of the places we're going to stop, if that makes sense. So for instance, as we traveled the Southwest, when we first hit the road, we headed to Southern California. So we left from the Dallas area, headed to Southern California, and I planned our learning along that route. So coincidentally, this was not planned, but we were already learning more modern American history in our schooling, in our regular history cycle. And so we were already like mid 1850s to current day times. So as we traveled the Southwest, I looked for places that would correlate with what we were learning in history or what we had already read about during the school year. So we got to the Arizona area and there was a copper mine, which was perfect. So we decided we were going to visit this copper mine in Bisbee, Arizona, which was an old copper mining town turned pretty much a ghost town. What was really cool is the copper tour, the mine tour, was led by one of the original miners from that copper mine. So the guy was like in his 80s, but it was super cool because we got a firsthand account of what it was like to be a copper miner in that copper mine way back in the earlier 1900s. So that was cool to hear, for the kids to hear about what copper mining really was like, and then to be in the copper mine and get to smell the smells and feel the cold air and all that good stuff, touch the walls and see, the carts that they toted the copper up to the top, with, or whatever. Then I decided to pull in learning about copper, the element of copper. So we learned a bit about the element of copper because we were at the copper mine. We learned about life of a miner. So I found a book at the gift shop of the copper mine about life of a miner. So that was really cool. So always check out the gift shops, bookshops in the area, because they're typically going to have like historical books about that area or significant happenings in history for that area. So I grabbed a book from the gift shop about life of a miner, and it took us through what it was like we read about the different elements of life being a miner. And the book covered mining in general, not specific to copper mines, but still it gave us an idea of more of what life was like. So they got to hear the person talking about being a miner in that copper mine. Then we read about what it was like to be a copper miner, and then we learned about the element of copper. So it was a quick study. We didn't spend a ton of time on it, but it brought all these different elements of learning, and guess what my kids remember? They remember what it's like to be a copper miner because they got to read about it and then they got to experience it. So that was super cool. Then, because we were in the Southwest area, I brought in books about plant life in the Southwest area. So we all know the plant life is unique to the Southwest area. So cactus and I'm trying to think of other plants. Those plants that are native to the Southwest area. We got books about that. We learned about those, why they thrive in that environment and why they may not thrive up in the Northeast. So we did all that. Then we also learned about the Native Americans who were native to that area. So we learned about the people group native to that area. We spent quite a bit of time on the Western United States in our first year of travel. So that was kind of sprinkled in and spread out while we were in the different areas of the Southwest. What was really cool about that is we were in that area and learning about the native people, learning about the geography, learning about the plant life, learning about more modern history of what was happening in more modern times. And it all ties together so they get a really well-rounded idea of all of the elements of life in that area of the country. And then as we traveled up to the Pacific Northwest, so up up through California, we learned about plants that were native to California, what, the coastal areas, things like that, the redwoods. We got up to Yosemite, and it was so cool because we had read these books about Yosemite and the discovery of Yosemite, a couple of years before, and in prep for going up to the redwoods, going up to Yosemite in that area, I brought in more books to learn more about the area, the plant life, the animal life, the geography, the history, all that good stuff. So another element that you can bring in is utilize YouTube. There are great YouTube videos out there that are well done, are pretty quick for kids to keep their attention, not long, drawn out documentaries. And so I'll pull those elements in as well, and we'll sit down and we'll watch, all about the river that leads into, Bridal Veil Falls, and that feeds into Bridal Veil Falls. So we learn about that. And I bring those elements in so that when we are walking those trails and seeing those things for the first time, our kids already have a point of reference for those things. So they can identify the plant, they can identify the animal, they can identify the waterfall and things like that. And then this is a given. As you're in the national parks, utilize the ranger programs. I think that's pretty common knowledge, whether you're already on the road, planning to hit the road, or just doing a family vacation. Our national park system has really excellent ranger programs. So utilize those. Have your kids do the ranger junior ranger program to get their badges. That's always fun. But then throughout your stay, the ranger programs, they have different programs throughout your stay that you can utilize and count that as learning, because my goodness, that's excellent learning. So you can tie in what you're reading at home, what you're watching at home, things of that nature, to the ranger programs that they're then going to hear or have already learned about as you visit the national park. So another suggestion, and I already touched on this a little bit, but look in the national parks gift stores. They usually have really excellent books in there. Sometimes they have DVDs, things of that nature to help bring the learning alive while you're there. We also always watch the video in the information center. Now, with COVID, things have changed, and some national parks are still showing the video, some national parks aren't. So check it out, see if they are, if they're not. But if they are, go take your kids in there. It may seem a little bit boring, but I assure you they are going to glean little nuggets of learning from that video and be able to tell you that, those things as you go in the park or after you leave the park. So this is a question we get, how do we make sure our kids are actually learning? Do we give them worksheets? Do I give them tests? Do they have bookwork? The answer is no, we don't. So we utilize something called narration. We do written narration, and then we do oral narration. What that means is, after we've read or after we've left a place, we talk about it, and we talk about it a lot. So we may read a book about the Redwood, National Forest, or the Redwoods. And after I close the book, I will say, what do you remember? Or I'll ask prompting questions. And what's really cool is, as each kid sort of pipes in with what they've learned, it triggers something in a sibling, and they'll pipe in with something else they remembered. And in that conversation of relaying what they read or what we just read together, it's solidifying those memories, solidifying that learning in their little brains. We do the same thing after we've left a national park. So, all right, we went on this hike today, or we went to this ranger talk today. What did you learn? What did you take away from it? And again, it's so cool to see that this child may remember this and this child may remember this, but by discussing it, it's triggering their memory. They're like, oh yeah, and blah, 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 blah. And so to this day, we all remember what a hemlock is from the ranger program in Glacier National Park, where she talked about a hey girl hemlock. So anytime we see a hemlock in, the forest or whatever, the kids are like, oh, remember, it's a hey girl hemlock because of what the ranger did in Glacier National Park, which is so cool because we have these memories. Obviously, it's triggering that memory of our travels, but it's also triggering the memory of learning. So they can identify this tree because of that ranger program, and how the ranger presented the information to them in the park. Another thing that I encourage, and we do in our own learning, is think outside the box. So yeah, you're going to Yosemite, you're naturally going to learn about the plants, the animals, the geography, all of those things. You need to bring in the elements of what were the native people, who were they that lived there, how did they live? That brings in, the early history there. What did it look like in more modern times before it became a national park? Who was living there? What was their life like? Things of that nature. How did they survive before modern times? But think outside the box. So those I feel like are givens, right? We are naturally going to bring those elements into our learning. But then what about an artist? So for instance, Ansel Adams, a lot of his photography was in Yosemite National Park, and there's a whole story behind, you know, why his photography was focused there, all of that kind of, you know, things of that nature. So I decided to bring in learning about Ansel Adams into our study about Yosemite National Park, because that was just another element of learning that I could bring in. And so because we have been Charlotte Mason inspired homeschooling, artist study has been part of our learning for several years. So Ansel Adams was an artist we could learn about who was applicable to what we were learning about with Yosemite National Park. So all over the country, you can do the same thing. Find a, you know, a quick Google search will find, you know, local famous artists or whatever, or maybe a famous piece of artwork that was painted or done or whatever, that was in the location that you're going to be visiting. So another thing is books. I keep talking about books. Where do we store all the books? So that's a really good question. Before we hit the road, we had a really large book collection, because the main part of our learning is through reading. So obviously those cannot all come on the road with us. So what I do is, we do have a storage unit back in Texas that we stored the majority of our books. And because I had sort of that first year, because we were only going to be on the road a year, like most people say. So I was like, okay, we're going to hit all these places. So I'm going to bring the books that are, you know, going to be applicable for the places that we're going to visit in this year of travel. So we're now in year 3. So we've been on the road for 2 years. So now in year 3, I'm like, that was funny. So I rotate our books. So I bring in what we are going to be learning about in like the legs of our trip, and as we go back to Texas, or we now have a home base in the Nashville area, as we go back to Nashville, I drop off books that are what we've already learned about, and I pick up books of what we're going to learn about. And then as we travel, and I run across more books that I want to read, I just have them delivered to whatever RV park that we're going to be at. So if you're a Thousand Trails member, all Thousand Trails parks can receive mail. So I just get them sent to whatever park we're going to be at, and you know, within the shipping time or whatever. So sometimes you have to plan ahead. Amazon Prime, it's like 2 days, so you don't have to plan too far ahead with that. But that's how I'm continuing to bring books or whatever into the rig, and then kind of offloading them as we go back. You can also, if you're not going to be back in, you know, the area where, you know, families' houses, or you don't have a storage unit or whatever, for a while, you can just package them up and media mail them back to wherever you might keep or store your stuff. That way they're not in your rig anymore, and you lighten the load, if you will. The weight size is actually one of the main reasons we started out in a toy hauler, because I didn't want to have to be limited with the amount of books that I could take. I realized that that's not how every family operates. So those are just some suggestions on keeping your book load not too heavy. And then not everybody likes books like I do. So in that case, utilize YouTube, utilize Audible. There's all kinds of different resources besides just reading that you can bring learning alive in your homeschooling as you're traveling through each area. Another way to bring learning alive as you travel in each area is contact the local Chamber of Commerce or Board of Tourism and ask if they have any experts in the area on different elements of the area. So for instance, if it's a historical area, there's probably either a club or there's an older retired person in the community who would absolutely love the opportunity to teach your kids and tell your kids about that area. So I think for most of it, it goes without saying that one of the reasons we choose the lifestyle of full-time RVing and traveling, or extended road trips, or however you're looking at it, RVing for your family, is peace and calm and sort of just a more quiet way of life. So my encouragement in that would be, don't feel overwhelmed with this. So I'm like rattling off things that we do, but that may not work for your family, and that's okay. You can keep it super simple, read one book, visit a national park, and your kiddos are going to glean so much from that because you're giving them that hands-on atmosphere and lifestyle of learning that they would not be getting, in a classroom with four walls. So keep it simple or make it as elaborate as you want. I have older kids, so we bring in harder books. We bring in more information because my kids are older. They can absorb more, have longer attention spans, and are hungry to learn more than if I had, a 4 and 6 year old. On that note, if you have kids that show a specific interest in something that you've read about, give them the opportunity to just run with that. So that would be for if there's a certain animal that you've read about in a national park or an area that you're going to visit, and they're just like come alive when you read about the animal, feed that, because our kids will remember the things that they're passionate about. They'll remember the things that they want to learn about, right? And so sometimes the way that our education system is structured is just to pour information into our kids without giving them the opportunity to really follow their interests. And when we have this lifestyle, when we road school and our learning becomes a lifestyle of learning, we have the pace of life that allows our kids and us to slow down and let them sort of fixate on an interest. So if you see that pop up as you're traveling or in an area that you've gone to, run with it. Don't brush that aside. Let your kids stop and fixate on it and read all the books on it and watch all the documentaries on it and go to all the museums about it or whatever, because they're going to remember what they're passionate about. And then if you are passionate about, what you're learning or in the area that you're in, your kids are also going to pick up on that too. So if you get excited about the hike, your kids are going to get excited about the hike. If you get excited about going to that museum, your kids are going to get excited about going to that museum. And there's always, the one that may not, but in general, that's oftentimes how it is, because you, as the mom or the parent, you set the tone for your home. So if you're excited about learning about the location you're going to, your kids are going to be excited about learning about the location that you're going to. Another great thing to do is make sure you're hitting local museums. So oftentimes local historical museums, but look for the little unassuming museums that may be in the strip center. We have found those to be some of the best museums in the country, the best learning, because going back to finding the expert, in those little museums, you're going to find people who are really passionate about whatever the museum is teaching you about. So and they often have time, they often have things, they brought in elements they've had elements donated that you wouldn't see in giant museums, and it's going to be smaller, it's going to be more narrowed down and niche to whatever you're learning about. So Lewis and Clark, let's take that for instance. Visiting, the Lewis and Clark Trail is long, and so you hit spots along the way as you travel, and you find a museum specific to Lewis and Clark, and it's going to be very niche, and so that's kind of a cool way to really enhance learning in each area that you go to. So I talked a lot about planning your route and then planning your learning around your route. You can actually flip-flop that. So a lot of homeschool material, if you're using a traditional homeschool approach, and we do both. So we have our normal curriculum that we use year after year, and we go through history cycles. So it's a 4-year history cycle. The 2 last years of that are early American history and a modern American history. So that covers a lot of ground across the United States, from the learning in the East, or early American history in the East, to westward expansion and all of those things, and then of course learning about the native peoples all over the United States. So you can also plan your travels around your schooling. This is really easily done on the East Coast with early American history, and that's actually how our passion for kind of learning-based travel, if you will, started. Derek had a work trip, maybe 5 or 6 years ago in DC, and I was like, we are tagging along. We are learning early American history this year, so we're gonna come and we're gonna visit all the places. And so we made it this extended family trip where we got to visit all the places, all these historic sites that we had read about throughout the year. And so that trip also helped ignite, like, oh my gosh, we have to visit the places that we read about, which if you're in American history, that's easy to do while you're RVing across the country. So you don't always have to plan your learnings around your route. Plan your route around your learning. So hit the East Coast and go do the path of early settlement, or all of those things with the American Revolution. Hit the battles and the Civil War, hit the Civil War battle sites, things of that nature, of what you're already learning about, because again, that brings your learning to life. And so that's another, you could go either route. Plan your travels and then plan your learning, or have your learning and plan your travels around your learning. So I really hope that this is encouraging to you. I hope that you can see that it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. It can be as simple as reading one book, visiting a place, and talking about it. If you have older kids, have them do written narration. Have them write a little, written narration would be like putting pen to paper on what they remember. And it's really cool because my kids, once they sit down and they start to do it, it just starts flowing out. And then at the end of your travels, you're gonna have like this notebook of documentation on what you visited and what you learned. Because eventually narration, whether it's oral narration or written narration, just becomes natural to our kids. So they're gonna write, or they're gonna tell you about all the things they're learning, because that's just natural. That's just what we do in school. And so it kind of overflows into the different areas of their life. So when they're talking to grandma and grandpa about where they visited, they're getting into the details. And as a mom, or as a dad, the homeschool parent, whoever you are, you can see, oh my gosh, this is really working. This is super cool. They're remembering what we read about. They're remembering what we learned about, because they're able to repeat it back to whoever they're talking to, and tell them about what they've learned. So that's, in our opinion, that's better than any test. That's better than any worksheet. That's better than any fill in the blank anything, because those are the things that our kids are going to take into adulthood and they're going to remember, because you brought learning to life through travel and through just a lifestyle of learning. So if you have any questions, I am more than happy to help answer them. I in no way think I'm an expert on this. I'm just a homeschooling mom. We've homeschooled lots of different ways over the years. This is hands down my favorite way to learn alongside with my kids, because we love travel, we love being together, and I just see the fruits of all that. So visit us at Lanes Less Traveled on Instagram, on Facebook. We have some YouTube videos up, and I'd love to get to know you too.